Good evening. The Australian Farnarkelers were literally on top of the world last night following their epoch-making victory against the formidable East German Farnarkeling machine in a closely contested final at the People's Farnarkeling Centre in light drizzle and heavy security in Moscow. The ruthlessly professional East Germans began strongly and had the Australians reeling from a series of quite obvious and very brutal personal fouls. But just after the liederkrans, it became obvious that the continually impressive Dave Sorensen had weathered the bone-crushing first warble and was prepared to take the fixture right up to the East Germans after the umlaut. The turning point came in the third warble when the oleaginous Sorensen arcled from well behind his own goal line, despite being held by both opposing fullbacks in a small ice-flattening machine he'd inadvertently backed into during a lapse in concentration. Unfortunately, only moments later, he struck an overhead light with a wet knee and short-circuited his trousers. It'll be tragic indeed if he can't be de-ionised in time to return home to what promises to be a hero's welcome in Sydney on Tuesday night. The victorious Australian Farnarkeling team returned home in triumph last night with the bevelled orb safe in their keeping until the challenge round begins again in late July Australian time. Team members were fulsome in their praise of the running of the championships and are approaching the government to get an Arkling grommet of international standard built in Canberra so overseas teams can provide much needed competition here during the northern summer. The heavily bandaged Dave Sorensen, who aggravated a thigh injury with a heavy fall from the aircraft while deplaning before the ramp was in position, reacted strongly to suggestions that corporate sponsorship is poised to take Farnarkeling into commercial television. Proposals are already with the governing body to introduce a solid program of one-day Farnarkeling fixtures, underlights with edited highlights between the warbles and a viewer competition tentatively called Classic Arkles. Major manufacturers have already come up with what they claim is the definitive Farnarkeling shoe, and T-shirts and initiatives in fast food are apparently already in the pipeline. The well-credentialed Sorensen said he would have nothing whatever to do with what he described as a ridiculous Farnarkeling circus, which he claimed would turn the game into some kind of joke, although he did admit that he'd been approached. It'll be very unfortunate for Arklephiles if Sorensen's assault hearing coincides with the exhibition match in Perth next Friday. Good evening. A capacity crowd was treated to a display of champagne Farnarkeling in an exhibition fixture run in Perth on Friday to aid world famine relief. In an all-star engagement, the victorious Australian World Championship side lined up against a composite invitation team from other Farnarkeling countries. The national side quickly demonstrated its total mastery of the code and pulled out every type of arkle from all parts of the grommet and seemed to have the flukum on a string, particularly when moving forward in defence. The very dexterous Dave Sorensen, who seems to set new standards every time he steps onto the sward, was in inspirational form, and the game has never had a better ambassador. He was instrumental in one almost magical arkle just before the umlaut when he notched one up from well outside the whiff-and-whacker by deflecting the gonad with his foot while being tackled. He was later involved in an unfortunate altercation with a section of wire netting at the southern end of the concourse, and it will be tragic indeed if he can't be disengaged in time for the Sportsman of the Year dinner, where he's the red-hot favourite to pick up the big one. Thank you, Geraldine. Dave Sorensen was named Sportsman of the Year at a well-attended postprandial black tie wallop in Sydney earlier this evening Australian time. The heavily bandaged but very dignified Sorensen, the Mick Young of Australian Farnarkeling, was given a standing ovation as an edited sequence of some of his more spectacular arkles was projected onto a makeshift grommet positioned in the ceiling at the back of the transom housing. Unfortunately, Sorensen suffered a catastrophic personal mishap while mounting the podium to pick up the sculpted tribute. He hadn't looked well since the soup, and it was no surprise to onlookers when he fell through a rostrum interstice only seconds later while raising the golden artefact and thanking his immediate family. Organisers said that this was the first time since the function's inception that the award had been taken internally, and it will be tragic indeed if the accolade-ectomy cannot be performed in time for Sorensen to attend the launching of the Farnarkeling Federation's new televised drive for popular